It's over. It's finally over.
After a disastrous result for the Conservatives, they might be over too. I'm Coco Khan.
And I'm Nish Kumar, and this is the first episode of Pod Save the UK under a Labour government.
We've got a massive election special for you today. We'll be bringing you highlights of the results, checking in with new Labour MP Torsten Bell, and hearing what political activist Femi Oluwole thinks about the result. But first...
We said we would end the chaos, and we will. We said we would turn the page, and we have. Today we start the next chapter, begin the work of change, the mission of national renewal, and start to rebuild our country. Thank you.
That was Keir Starmer announcing the long-awaited and heavily foretold victory of the Labour Party, ending 14 years of Conservative rule and starting, hopefully, a new positive chapter for the UK. How are you feeling, Coco?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Hungover. I'm really, really hungover. But I think that's actually quite a good metaphor for today, don't you think?
Yeah.
You know, very exciting change, but also a bit of anxiety there.
What? Would you like to tell the listeners what you were doing last night? To contextualise, you weren't just out on a sort of election night bender.
Yeah. Wasn't. I was hosting an election party, which was very, very lovely. It was with Marina Perkis from the Truss. Do you know what was most interesting about it is that any listeners of the show will know that both of us have been quite conflicted about the current Labour leadership. But nonetheless, I was happy to see the Conservatives get their just dessert, so to speak.
Yeah.
In the room, though, it was really subdued.
Yeah, right.
You know, there's a lot of talk on the media today about this landslide Labour victory. But I think amongst Labour voters, it's bittersweet.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems facing the country. There's a lot of issues to discuss. Your dress is on backwards. We should probably cover that off at the top.
Why did you tell everyone?
I just think it's a good visual metaphor for where you are in yourself at the moment, at this current moment in time. So it was an official event. You weren't just hosting a soiree. It was an event. There was an audience.
Yes.
There were people talking about the election.
Yeah, and it was obviously very, grown up in the sense that we talked about the challenges that the future government will face and what it means about the rise of reform. But nonetheless, woo! There was a lot of wooing. Just me on my own. I was bringing a lot of woo. Jaeger bombs were consumed.
Jaeger bombs?
I know, Nish, I know.
Jägermeister is like, I don't know, it's some sort of like, it feels like the sweat of a person that needs to think about their life choices. But we should say that as we record at about 9 a.m. On the Friday morning, Labour have won 411 seats. That's 210 more than the 2019 election. The numbers for the Conservative Party are sobering in a way that would be helpful at this point in time for Coco Khan. It would be the ultimate hangover cure for Coco Khan. It is. The Tories have had a hell of a bacon sandwich this morning. The margin of Tory destruction is staggering. They've won 119 seats again at the time of recording, losing a whopping 249 seats since the 2019 election, where, of course, they won an 80-seat majority with a total of 365 seats. They did lose a few over the course of the parliament, as is normal for any parliament, but it was a very, very strong position to be in. Labour's new majority is 291. This is, from the perspective of analysing the Conservative Party, objectively hilarious. It is objectively hilarious because it's very funny and very refreshing just to see actual political consequences for... I mean, depends on how far you want to zoom out for it, but certainly, at least within the course of this parliament, 5 years of scandal, sleaze, uninterrupted political failure. It is a party that has repeatedly pushed the self-destruct button and has largely forced those consequences of that self-destruction on the public in this country. And it was nice for one moment to see the consequences of that self-destruction blow up in their faces.
So I know we're being enthusiastic right now, but if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we've had some reservations about what Labour has been serving up lately. We'll get into more of that later with our special guest, new Labour MP Torsten Bell and political activist Femi Oluwole. But first, there's been some absolutely delightful results coming in overnight. Joining us now to discuss some of the very best results of the night is political journalist Zoe Grünewald. Welcome back, Zoe. Did you get much sleep?
I've had about 2 hours, so I'm just gonna warn listeners now.
Coco smells like Oliver Reed. So
I think you're doing very well, Coco. I really do.
I think you're holding it together. The reason that I didn't do anything more expansive with my evening is that I would not be able to hold it together at all. Let's talk, before we get into Labour, let's talk more about the what we previously called the Portillo moments, which is a moment in 1997 when Conservative Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo lost his seat live on air. I guess we now call them Jaeger bomb moments. The moments where a Conservative did so badly.
I'm worried about this being crystallised in my life. You know what I mean?
What, Jaeger bomb moments?
I'm worried that in 30 years from now, someone will be like, yes, you are the journalist of the Jaeger bomb moments.
we have spoken about Jaeger bombs like a lot in the last 30 seconds.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Jägermeister. Do you want a spirit that tastes as bad as it makes you feel the next day? Jägermeister. Let's talk about a new moment. Forget the Portillo moment. Forget the Jaeger bomb moment. It's time for the Truss moment.
Recorded for each candidate is as follows.
This is Sky News' coverage of the moment Liz Truss lost her seat.
Independent, 6,000.
The camera is now zooming in on Liz Truss.
Douglas,
Lorraine, it looks like her spirit has left her body.
Britain, 7 parties.
She's sort of staring off into the middle distance.
She's disassociating.
Mackenzie, Truss, Liz, the Conservative Party candidate.
Here we go.
11,217.
Oh, I think she's lost. Yep, she's lost.
Yeah, so that was the moment that Liz Truss lost her seat. But just that was not all. So many high-profile Conservatives lost their seat. Gillian Keegan, the education minister, who was caught on camera saying that no one had praised her for doing a fucking good job. Turns out you didn't do a very fucking good job, Gillian. Grant Shapps, the defence secretary, Alex Chalk, the justice secretary, Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the Commons, and some people's pick for the next leader of the Tory party. Greg Hands, who's the business and trade minister, who one of our producers actually interviewed because he was the member of parliament for the constituency that the recording studio we recorded this podcast is in. Johnny Mercer, the Veterans Minister, Simon Hart, the Chief Whip, Michelle Donelan, the Science Secretary, Lucy Fraser, the Culture Secretary, Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary. The Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross, lost his seat to the SNP. Therese Coffey lost her seat after Labour candidate Jenny Riddell-Carpenter overturned a 20,533 majority. Michael Fabricant, who people will recognise as being a sort of, he looks like a kind of AI-generated image of Boris Johnson. And this is the one that tastes the sweetest. Mm-hmm. This is so sweet that even hearing it gave me diabetes of the ears. Jacob Rees-Mogg lost his seat. There's very few things in life that are unambiguously pieces of good news. Just listing them has made me so happy. I actually, in the process of listing them, also received a text message on my computer that said, there is a new Kendrick video and the Tories are out. I'm just checking that you've not jizzed yourself to the moon and need rescuing.
Yeah, we should just check that.
A lot of people don't know that James Acaster can work blue. A lot of people don't know that. It's an astonishing list of Conservative MPs.
Absolutely.
The question I wanted to ask you, though, Zoe, is this the supermajority everyone was banging on about?
Well, it's a big majority. I mean, the word supermajority is actually meaningless, as we know, because it's an Americanism. It comes from a very different set of political and electoral circumstances. It's a great result for the Labour Party. The problem is we had so many polls beforehand which were predicting absolutely astronomical results for the Labour Party. And so anything less than that kind of by default looks like Labour have slightly failed. Definitely we've seen a narrowing, which was to be expected. It is what usually happens. And the Conservatives, I mean, some people were saying they would get under 100 seats, including me, hopefully. But, they haven't. They've got over that. And that is now going to be seen as a success for the Conservative Party. It is not a success. They have absolutely depleted their vote share. What is good about this big majority is it will give Starmer space and time to do things that are hopefully consequential and make a difference to people's lives. So one of the big things that Labour wants to do as soon as it can is planning reform, which sounds really boring, but actually is vitally important because one of the biggest problems with our economy, with the political system in this country is we don't have enough housing and we don't have enough infrastructure. And a lot of that is to do with our archaic planning system. We don't have enough actual planners, people who are going through planning applications and approving them. Developers hold on to land for ages, hoping to sell it at inflated rates to councils, which mean they can't build on it. Labour wants to overturn all those things. They want to make it much easier to build. If Labour has a big majority, it just makes it so much easier to get legislation like that through.
But isn't there a bit of an issue for Labour in terms of the majority being so big that probably certain MPs with the backbenchers, for example, won't feel like they need to toe the line all the time?
That is a problem. There are pockets of discontent, both in the Labour Party, but also on the progressive side of their support. And that is going to be a problem for Starmer, because at the minute, what he's got is a very kind of broad pool of support, but it's quite brittle, it's quite shallow. And, it isn't too long till MPs in constituencies with really narrow margins, like, for example, Wes Streeting, we saw he barely clung on to his seat this time. He's going to be feeling the pressure from his constituents. He's probably not the best example because he is extremely close to Keir Starmer and he's a shadow cabinet member, but there'll be other MPs in similar positions with small majorities. Also, if you have a big majority, you have lots of MPs stuck on the backbenches, hoping one day they might get a ministerial position. And the less and less it seems that ministerial position is coming, the more and more people start making their own demands. So in some ways, if you have lots of ambitious MPs who aren't, in their view, being rewarded for that ambition, that's when you start to get dissent.
How good a night was this for the Liberal Democrats?
It's an excellent night for the Liberal Democrats.
Excellent. Let's get the paddleboards out.
Yeah, I know.
Excellent night for the Liberal Democrats. They have absolutely exceeded their vote. I think it's the highest vote share that they've got. Ed Davey absolutely smashed his seat. He's done extraordinarily well.
And actually physically smashing a seat is one of the few publicity stunts he didn't
He's
do.
He's probably got it planned today and we probably ruined the surprise. 71 seats. So extraordinary result for the Lib Dems. More than was actually predicted in the opinion polls, but also the exit poll. They've outperformed the exit poll. So they're going to be really pleased. Now, we have to realise a lot of this is tactical voting, and that's why we've seen a lot of strong support for Lib Dems in those sort of true blue areas where people didn't want to vote Tory anymore.
We should also say it was a very good night for the Green Party. It's particularly for the co-leaders, because Adrian Ramsey is the co-leader, gained Waveney Valley from the Tory Party, and Carla Denyer, former guest of this show, and co-leader of the Green Party, won in Bristol Central. They've got 4 seats in total. That's a huge night for the Green Party, right?
Absolutely. 4 was, in some ways, best case scenario, I think, for the Green Party. So they're going to be really, really pleased. Obviously, that comes at the extent of a Labour loss in Bristol Central with Thangam Debonair, who was a shadow cabinet minister. That's going to be felt by the Labour Party, but it was expected. Bristol's got a really strong student constituency, lots of progressives there who have been disappointed not only by the party's approach to Gaza, but also rowing back on the 28 billion Green Pledge, which, it's hard to actually quantify where and why Labour is losing support, but there are some specific things you can point to. And I think particularly in Bristol, that's where a lot of that support for the Greens is coming.
We are obliged, though I suspect none of us are particularly enthused by the prospect of doing so, to talk about the Reform Party. Yeah. The sum total of all of this is that Reform have won the same number of seats as the Green Party. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of the media coverage, you would assume that Reform were now the official party of opposition. I do understand some of that because there were a lot of seats where Reform actually beat the Conservatives into third place and came second to Labour. So Nigel Farage finally won his seat. Richard Tice won his seat. Lee Anderson, who was the former Conservative MP. The former Southampton Football Club chair, Rupert Lowe, also won a seat. Their vote share was very high, 15.3% of the vote share, which compared to the Tories' vote share, which was 25.9%, is an alarmingly high figure. So does this mean now that we're going to see the Conservatives tack, even further to the right?
It's interesting. I think the most influential part of this is the fact that Nigel Farage is now going to be in the House of Commons. Yeah. So he is going to be putting pressure on the Conservative Party almost from the inside every day. He's going to be putting them on the spot. And we know that there are Conservative figures in the party, like Suella Braverman, who is pretty supportive of Nigel Farage, and Kemi Badenoch and other kind of right-wing Conservative figures who are pretty keen to lay the failure of the Conservatives at the door of not moving rightward enough. Yeah. The thing I wonder about Reform, Nigel Farage is an anti-establishment figure. If you put him in the establishment, that can sometimes take away some of their sheen. Yeah. So look at what happened to George Galloway. He came in as an anti-establishment figure. He lost his seat last night. this happens because these figures come in, they promise their constituents the world. They say, you know, you vote for me, I'm going to represent your interests in Parliament every day, I'm going to sort stuff out. And then they don't do that. It doesn't happen because it's not that simple. With Nigel Farage, that's even more the case because at least with George Galloway, what he was telling his constituents was he was going to be a voice for Gaza. That's quite quantifiable. You can stand up in Parliament, you can make interventions, you can do parliamentary questions. Farage's vision is much more incoherent.
Yes.
So when it comes to the people of Clacton, who, you know, Clacton is a deprived constituency, there's a lot of disillusionment, a lot of disenfranchisement. Life is not going to magically get better for the people of Clacton just because Nigel Farage is your MP. So I wonder if maybe this is very hopeful, but actually Nigel Farage could be slightly neutered by being put into Parliament. And I just wonder how solid reform is as an entity, or if people are going to get sick of this being the Nigel Farage party. And my hope is they're actually not that solid, and bringing them into Parliament might be the best way to watch them disintegrate.
Let's look at the devolved nations. It's been a terrible night for the SNP. Absolutely terrible. They lost 38 seats. Here's SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn talking to the BBC about the result.
Can you hear me? Stephen Flynn, hi there. Can you hear me?
How are you?
I'm fine.
Yeah,
more to the point, how are you?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Oh, jolly good, jolly good. More to the point, how are you? Because it's not looking good for the SNP.
No, it's a very bittersweet night for me. I'm obviously delighted on a personal level.
For the benefit of people who were listening to that and didn't watch that clip and thought maybe Stephen Flynn was on some kind of delay, he wasn't. The silence that you hear is him puffing out his cheeks and looking like Dustin Hoffman at the end of The Graduate.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't have a poker face, does he?
No.
That was pure sadness. Yeah.
Well, because, I mean, you know, when we're talking about the victory of Labour, I mean, let's be realistic here. In terms of vote share, Labour actually didn't really improve enormously. But in Scotland, now that's where there's a real victory. Most of the votes returned to Labour. They won 37 seats.
Yeah.
I mean,
extraordinary.
What do you think about the SNP in general now?
And the SNP were already struggling. We know that the party is under investigation over its financial situation. We know that has involved Nicola Sturgeon, the former leader, and her husband. They now have new leader, John Swinney, experienced SNP member, but plunged straight away into a general election. But the other thing is the independence, which has united the SNP, has had so many setbacks.
Yeah.
And now the party is lacking its identity. And it's split because there is one side of the SNP party that is actually quite conservative, it's quite nationalist. There's another that's very progressive. And it's really hard to reconcile the two. And because the SNP aren't presenting any convincing reason to vote for them over Labour, then they're just going to hemorrhage votes. And they knew this was coming. And I think, you know, it is a real shame because where the SNP is at now with John Swinney in charge, and I think Stephen Flynn is in many ways a very impressive communicator. I think he's quite an impressive politician. Unfortunately, for the people of Scotland, it looks like their priority is making sure the Tories are not in Westminster anymore.
So let's move on to Wales. The headline there is that it is a total Conservative wipeout. They lost 12 seats. It's the first time in nearly 2 decades that the Tories have failed to win any seats. You know, as progressives on this podcast, we could probably take some joy in that. But what do you think that means in terms of Wales' position in this Labour government? You know, are they going to be more important now, do you think?
It's really interesting because Wales was constantly used by the Tories as an attack line. Look what's happening to the NHS in Wales. They really wanted to demonstrate that, you know, Labour was failing Wales. Actually, Labour's done very well. It's won an extra 9 seats, got a total of 27. The thing that is interesting is Plaid Cymru won an extra 2 seats, and they now have a total of 4. And I think to some extent that's to do with the leader's quite impressive performance in some of the debates. I think it came across really well. And the Lib Dems have taken a seat as well, which is interesting. But yeah, I think absolutely. Now we have a Labour government who care a lot about devolution. They're talking a lot in their manifesto about uniting Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, wanting to work together as that kind of strong union.
Let's talk about Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin have 7 seats. They are now the largest party in Northern Ireland, meaning that they are the largest party at all levels of government. They're now the largest party. The DUP lost 3 seats. They're now on 5. The DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, have been sort of mired in a variety of scandals. Most recently, some sort of horrific allegations of sexual abuse and sexual assault against Jeffrey Donaldson, who's the former leader of the DUP. It's a fascinating position for Sinn Féin to be in now.
Yeah. Especially when you sort of compare it to the SNP, or Scotland, which has sort of moved in the other direction. It's moved away from the nationalist hold, and you now see Sinn Féin become the largest party, taking all these votes and being a very heavily kind of nationalist party and wanting to have that kind of that representation. I think it's a really interesting shift, and we know there's been really poor tensions between Westminster and Northern Ireland for a long time. I think now conversations as well about leaving the ECHR, even though it's not on the cards under a Labour government, have definitely worsened those tensions because, the ECHR underpins the Good Friday Agreement. Yeah. So I think there is a sense in Northern Ireland that Westminster use Northern Ireland as a political football. And I think that probably goes some way to explaining this increase in vote share for Sinn Féin. It's going to be really interesting to see if Starmer is able to improve those relations. But it's, it has been a real mess. The government have made a real mess of it.
So, Zoe, we're going to come back to you a little later. But after the break, we're speaking to the new Labour MP, Torsten Bell.
I wonder if he's hungover.
He should be.
He should be.
Joining us now on Pod Save the UK is Torsten Bell, the new Labour MP for Swansea West in Wales. Torsten is the chief exec of the Resolution Foundation, a think tank that aims to improve living standards for people on low and medium incomes, and was formerly head of policy for Ed Miliband. It's quite the resume. How are you feeling? Congratulations, by the way.
My dominant feelings are obviously tired due to the no sleep phenomenon that everyone has been going through, and then very lucky indeed to be embarking on a new stage of life and, in a lovely place in the country.
This is a big shift for you, right? Because you have worked in policy for many years, in government for the Labour Party and at a think tank, and now you've shifted into a job with, let's say, different responsibilities. What was the driving motivation to become an MP?
That is a good question. I mean, mainly I've spent the last 9 years, as you kindly said, running the Resolution Foundation, a think tank. And I'm not saying the only thing there we do is to draw charts, but we do draw a lot of charts. And a lot of them, if I'm honest, are a bit grim, right? They're about things that haven't been going very well in Britain, whether it's charts of wages not growing, or it's charts of food bank queues going up, or it's charts of NHS waiting lists. So at some stage, you have to say, right, that's enough drawing of the charts. What are we going to do to try and change them?
One of the concerns that a lot of people have is about the living standards for people on low and middle incomes. That's been a huge part of your remit at the Resolution Foundation. With something like the 2-child benefit cap, you in April wrote it has to go. And we know that it would lift 500,000 children out of poverty. Are you going to continue making the case for scrapping it now that you're in government?
Well, let's just do the big picture first. The government that has just been evicted from office has the worst record of any of our lifetimes on the economy. Wages stuck at the same level they were back when, as you said, I was working in the Treasury in 2008. So I think a lot of what this election is about, and a lot of what the big question facing Britain is about living standards. It's about how do we get living standards up, particularly for lower income workers. And that's about making sure we are growing the economy and wages are going up. And that's what I've just written a book about how do we make sure that we have got an economy where wages are growing and inequality is coming down. Now, specifically on the question you're asking on the 2-child limit. So just to remind everyone who doesn't spend their lives either in politics or in policy world, this is the decision taken by the Conservatives that if you have a third child born after 2017, then you don't receive any additional benefits for those children. So the reason this gets a lot of discussion is the reason you pointed out just then, which is the rise in child poverty that we've seen in recent years is driven by a rise in poverty amongst larger families. By larger families, we mean people with 3 or more kids. Now, one of the reasons for that is the 2-child limit. So now, the policy is one that everybody in the Labour movement, all Labour MPs, everyone thinks shouldn't be there. And like with lots of things that the Conservative Party have done, we would like to see it go. But, you've been hearing Keir Starmer all through this campaign And he's saying, look where the country is. People are fed up with politicians promising things that they can't deliver. And so this is one where, yes, we'd all like to see it go, like we would with lots of things. I mean, more money for the NHS. I'm sure you'd all like to see that. More money for schools and hospitals. Those will all have to be things that we show how we can pay for, because people aren't going to believe us if we just say, yes, definitely that thing as well.
Can I ask you, what is the feeling within the Labour movement about tax? Because obviously tax has been the one thing the Conservatives have been trying to criticise the Labour Party on. They're saying, inevitably they are going to raise taxes. Just so you know, on this show, we think tax is cool. So we don't mind the idea of there being tax raises. What's the feeling?
Are you two lobbying for a presenter's tax?
My non-dom status is my own business, Torsten, okay? Just to clarify, that is a joke. I'm very much dommed, although I have to feel that there was a better way of phrasing it than
That's
that.
what everybody with a trust fund would say.
I on several occasions in the BBC coverage that I was watching last night, Conservatives raised the spectre of more tax, and they were held to task by the presenters a couple of times of saying, well, there seems to be this discrepancy. Do you think that was a mistake in the Conservative campaign, this kind of fear-mongering around tax rises, given that there is public support for increasing taxes on the richest people in society?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of mistakes in the campaign.
Yes, let's not confine it to one.
The rain, mistakes. D-Day, mistakes. Calling the election when you're 20 points behind in the poll, mistakes. So we haven't got a lack of mistakes to have a chat about. I think on the monomania, on thinking you can hang a whole campaign on don't vote for the other guys, they might increase your taxes.
But taxes are good. We're talking about it again like it's a negative. Taxes are good. I'm just curious. Is there just a change in the feeling?
No, to be a bit careful, because people have had a really tough time, right? Food prices are up by 30% over the last 2 years. As I said, taxes are up significantly. Energy bills are significantly higher than we were all used to. And that comes on the back of, as I said to you before, wages not growing for the last few years. So taxes are good in the sense that we do all need to fund a civilized society, and they are a prerequisite to that. And if we talk about taxes as, just taking away from people out of spite or something, then we are doing a disservice because they're what allows us to have public services that allow us to live in dignity. And all the rest. But there's another way of going the other way, which I sometimes hear from people, which is taxes in of itself a good thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, when people are feeling really hard up, you need to be careful about, because it really matters who is paying those taxes and what you're using the money for. And the public definitely think both those things, and they're right to. And I think sometimes there is a bit of a kind of, amongst kind of better off people, sometimes there's a bit of a dismissive, everyone should just be happy about. That's definitely wrong. We need to make sure people's living standards are rising. And so it does matter whose taxes go up. That's why if you look at what Rachel Reeves has focused on in the manifesto, it is tax rises to make sure, there's some upfront money into public services, whether it's into the police or it's into hospitals, extra appointments, or it's into our schools. But that is coming from carefully calibrated tax rises, VAT on private schools, closing some of the non-dom loopholes, oil and gas levies, because you shouldn't be gung-ho about tax rises on ordinary working people. As I say, when food prices are up by 30%. And by the way, food prices up by 30%, people definitely raise with me. I mean, they don't say 30%. Yeah. They say other expletive-filled sentences about going to the shop on Friday. I had that yesterday. A woman literally going into the polling station yesterday saying to me, clearly worried about that Friday shop.
Oh, goodness me.
I'm aware that you've been up all night, and this is maybe quite a heavy question to hang on somebody that's, I think, drinking a much-needed coffee by the looks of things.
First and only coffee of the day.
Wow.
Respect, man. I'm at number 4, and I got some sleep last night. We've seen a low turnout of this election. We know from available polling data that trust in our political system is an all-time low. What can be done by this incoming government to change that and help fix the trust deficit?
I think that is exactly the question you should be asking people like me and others, because I don't think it's too heavy. And if people don't want to talk about that, then because that is the situation we're facing. I mean, look, what's the lessons from last night's election results? Well, one, people want to change and they want a Labour government, and that's very clear. But also that one of the other outcomes of the scale of Tory failure of the last 14 years isn't just that people say, oh, look, things didn't get better. It's that lots of people have started saying they can't or they won't get better. And that does feed exactly the kind of dangers. That's why I think about it again in the book that has just come out. There I'm talking about, look, think about this economic failure. It's not like a nice to have that we start turning this around. And it's not just, we'd like to consume more stuff, although I think that's a completely legitimate desire for people to have. It's, if you don't turn this around, it takes you to a very dark place for your politics and your economics. And we shouldn't have a Reform Party on a significant share of the vote. And that's what happens if we don't start seeing material progress in people's lives. Because remember, we're not a kind of hierarchical society of the 19th century. We don't have widespread religion. So the things that bind us as together as a democracy and a society has been, for lots of the second half of the 20th century, the idea that together we get better off, that we're a healthy society, that we provide the public services people need, and that some of that better off also turns into our day-to-day living standards. And that has come to a halt. And it is not surprising that people are really pissed off and asking questions about whether, the system delivers for them. So then that's the first half. And you asked, what do we do about it? I definitely don't have all the answers to that, but I'll give you my partial answer to that question. You've got to start delivering on the bread and butter issues, which are jobs, housing, wages, security, potholes. And I know sometimes people laugh, right? About, they're talking about potholes again. Every street you walk down, every door you knock on, what's wrong with potholes? Well, one, it's really annoying, right?
Yeah.
You're driving around or cycling around or whatever you're doing. It's not just that. Potholes have become a symbol. Like, if we can't even do that, we can't even have roads. But every day you're reminded that we're not doing the basics. And so I think we should be talking about potholes. We should go on from that to talk about how do we start delivering what I would call bread and butter social democracy. But if you don't know the word social democracy, call it what you want. But better jobs, more housing, better quality housing, wages that grow, a public realm that we're proud of. That is how we start rebuilding trust in the areas that I know about. I'm sure there are lots of other areas. I'm not going to start giving, a better popular culture. I don't know, you guys can sort that out. But on the stuff that I know about, that's what we need to do.
Listen, some of the potholes around me, you cycle into those, you're not coming out. They are craters. I'm sure you've been aware of the hype around you. People have been whispering, he's going to be the next Chancellor. One, how does that feel? And, it's quite I would be quite stressed by that. This expectation of me. How do you feel personally about those rumours? And also, are they true? Do you have big plans?
I'll tell you the secret to not getting stressed about them.
Okay.
It's knowing they're nonsense.
Okay.
Look, I'm going to be and I do think, this is a slightly trite point, but the country has just elected the first female chancellor. Right? I can remember doing interviews in my previous job, having to correct interviewers when they asked questions that were implicit that there would only ever be a male Chancellor of the Exchequer. Wow. And there is about to be a female Chancellor of the Exchequer, the first in 800 years, and a woman with an economics background. I don't think she needs any bloke who knows a bit of economics like I do to tell her what to do. She is going to be a bloody great Chancellor. And I'm going to be standing behind her, clapping everything she does and voting it through because, Rachel Reeves is a brilliant woman and she's going to be a great Chancellor. And that's the only Chancellor that this Labour government's going to need.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please go celebrate and for the love of God, get some sleep.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you both.
Joining us now in the studio is the activist and journalist Femi Oluwole. Welcome back to PS UK, Femi. You were at the Stop the Tories election party last night. How was the mood?
Everyone was really happy, but also everyone's still in a holding position because we're waiting to see what Starmer does next. Because he's basically been trying to pretend to be like he's a Tory for the last 4 years. And so we're essentially hoping that he spent the last 4 years lying to us, which is a kind of a weird place to be in politics, that you hope your prime minister is a complete liar.
I last time you were on the show, we talked about the kind of emotional element of voting tactically. Just on an emotional level, how are you feeling knowing that you voted tactically rather than who you believed in?
So I got lucky. I recently moved to a place where I could vote for whoever I wanted. So I got to vote Green yesterday.
Oh, right. Okay.
But if I was still in Solihull, I might have probably still voted Green, even though the tactical choice would have been away. But I think a lot of people did vote tactically according to the stats because they are not happy with this. It's very, very clear the majority of the country is to the left of Keir Starmer. So that's going to be the fight now.
Given the huge vote share, especially comparably to the last election, that the Lib Dems received, the Greens winning 4 seats, it does suggest that there was some element of tactical voting and maybe some element of sensible cooperation between the, I guess, at least notionally progressive parties.
Yeah, so the tactical vote was definitely a major factor, especially with people like the Movement Forward and Stop the Tories.vote basically pushing the idea that if we really push out the tactical vote, then we might be able to push the Tories into third place, which would have been awesome. And so that was there as the big carrot, but yeah.
So at the time, we talked about how, if we're looking at voter reform, we're looking at PR, we are also looking at welcoming reform and also what I would describe as harder right parties into government. We've seen that last night anyway. You know what I mean? Yep. How are you feeling about reform?
So reform is the stick. Reform is the thing that will happen if Keir Starmer doesn't deliver for working class people. If he doesn't pull every lever at his disposal, that means wealth tax in order to help working class people. That means rejoining the EU single market in order to make food cheaper and increase the money in people's pockets. It does involve actually addressing the systemic inequality in terms of regional inequality and helping those northern towns, those Welsh towns, those rural areas that were forgotten, which led to the Brexit vote. If he doesn't do those things, then come 2029, Nigel Farage is going to walk into Parliament over the bones of the Tory and Labour parties.
Last week, you were unceremoniously ejected from a reform rally in Birmingham. Let's have a quick listen to this.
So, right here.
Show me over here.
Right here is my press pass. You can see that right there. My press pass. I'm a member of the British press.
Okay, yeah.
I'm being escorted out without any justification. You understand that?
We've been told you're not allowed in the venue, sir, so we've been asked you to leave.
You understand that, right?
Thank you.
That is Reform UK kicking out a member of the British press.
Take you out, sir, thank you.
Very good. Nice. See, I'm being physically manhandled. I have just arrived. I've done nothing. And they are kicking me out of the venue. I'm being physically pushed out of the venue because Reform UK, that is their attitude to free speech. A member of the British press is being physically pushed out of their rally during an election.
It's powerful stuff seeing that, isn't it? Although, can we be honest, were you surprised by that?
No, I wasn't surprised because about a week before that, I went to Stafford and I recorded 3 of their candidates saying that Brexit has made the UK poorer, and if elected, they would do a no-deal Brexit, which would make it even worse and damage our food supply for the next 20 years, but it would be worth it. So they're on record as saying that they will be damaging the country, hurting working class people, and I exposed it last time I was there. So of course, they're not going to want me to do that again. So I was kind of worried when I got to the front of the queue, and so I started filming, and then that happened. So not only have they proven the whole the narrative that they are the answer for working class people, that they attack immigrants, etc., because they care about working class people, that's proven to be bull because they've already admitted they plan to make people poorer. And their other narrative that they're the champions of free speech kind of falls apart when they start censoring journalists and dragging them out of buildings.
Femi, you're somebody who sort of came of age politically as a campaigner around Brexit. Keir Starmer originally wanted a second referendum. He's now saying that one won't happen within his lifetime, and he also can't envision the country rejoining the single market or the customs union in his lifetime. What do you think? Is this the time to start campaigning again?
Well, if we go back to the thing I said about how Nigel Farage is the stick, the threat that if Keir Starmer doesn't improve people's quality of life in the next 5 years, then he's going to walk into Parliament. The biggest lever that he can pull is pretty much Brexit. It is rejoining the EU single market, given that I can't think of any other single policy that almost all economists agree is a major drag on the UK economy. And if he doesn't pull it, he's just handing Farage power. So in terms of what he can do, that is the lever to pull.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the Labour plan is contingent on growth. Several economists have warned the Labour Party that its growth plan is unachievable without at least a move to rejoin the EU customs union. Politically, that was considered to be a kind of poison chalice for Labour to raise at all in this election. Given the size of the majority, is there a possibility of something like that being approached now, do you think?
It's not even the size of the majority that's the issue. The issue is that all the defences you had of Keir Starmer were all based on, I've got to say this in order to get the Tories out, otherwise the Daily Mail won't allow us into power. He has power now. Even if it was just a majority of one, he has power. He can do it now. So if he wants to rejoin the single market and improve people's quality of life, he can do it. choosing not to would be extremely worrying.
Femi, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK.
My pleasure.
Okay, Zoe is now back in the studio. Let's zoom in on some of the, I guess, caveats to the successful night for Labour that we've sort of alluded to. Let's talk about Islington North. That's the seat of former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. Here's a clip from The Count.
Jeremy Bernard Corbyn, commonly known as Jeremy Corbyn, independent, 24,000.
That was a clip from the BBC there. Corbyn won 24,120 votes, comfortably beating his Labour rival, Praful Nagant, who took home 16,873 votes. Another interesting seat is Chingford and Woodford Green. Now, regular listeners will remember that that was the seat that was going to be contested by left-wing Labour candidate Faiza Shaheen before her candidacy was spectacularly revoked. Shaheen ran as an independent alongside official Labour candidate Sharma Tatler and Conservative Ian Duncan-Smith, who regular listeners will also remember is one of the principal causes of politically induced vaginal dryness, which was a...
Zoe is furrowing her brow, and I understand why you would say that.
I don't disagree. I just wonder why it had to be said. Why you had to put that on my head this morning.
A few weeks ago, we found a piece of campaign literature that Ian Duncan-Smith was holding a special clinic to talk about the menopause. In Chingford,
yes.
To talk to ladies about the menopause. That then spun out into a conversation between me and Coco about vaginal dryness, and it was suggested that Ian Duncan-Smith himself may be the primary instigator of vaginal dryness, regardless of the age of the person involved. Now, so it's sort of unfortunately the vote was split 50-50 between the Labour candidate and Faiza Shaheen, and Ian Duncan-Smith came through the middle. So the numbers involved are Ian Duncan-Smith on 17,281, Sharma Tatler on 12,523, and Faiza Shaheen on 12,445. So it is clearly a majority for left of centre and left-wing votes. But somehow Ian Duncan-Smith has come through the middle of this. Faiza Shaheen afterwards tweeted, they said we wouldn't go anywhere. They put out graphs they knew were lies in order to confuse local people. They lied about me to mislead people. But in 4 weeks, we achieved the same vote as a political party that has been around for 100 years. I'm so angry that the Labour Party has done this to Chingford and Woodford Green. They've returned Ian Duncan-Smith to Westminster and should be ashamed. Labour's candidate will now go back to Brent while we have to deal with the consequences. You've given me so much support. I can't express how grateful I am. We will fight on. In a sort of night of huge amounts of success for the Labour Party, specifically what happened in Chingford and Woodford Green feels like a completely unnecessary, self-inflicted wound by the Labour leadership by deselecting Faiza Shaheen, who ran against Duncan-Smith, ran extremely close to Ian Duncan-Smith in 2019, had a campaign that attracted a huge amount of attention. Some very high-profile people, including Hugh Grant, going down to campaign for this huge amount of support behind her. She's from the area. Yeah. She's an incredibly qualified person, somebody who knows a huge amount about the academics behind inequality. She comes from a working-class background in the area. And she was deselected over liking a tweet of a Jon Stewart video. It all seems a truly spectacular own goal for the Labour Party.
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk about this without rehashing the conversations we were having not so long ago about why she was deselected and Diane Abbott's treatment as well, because the two went hand in hand. It's a massive own goal for Labour, and they're going to be looking at this. And there's no way that I think that they can't see this as a misstep.
I think one of the most interesting results, again, we cannot state this enough, this was a hugely successful night for the Labour Party, but it's worth considering a couple of the caveats here. The Labour Shadow Cabinet Minister, Jonathan Ashworth, has lost his seat to an independent Shocker Adam with a margin of 979 votes. Now, Ashworth has been under sustained pressure in his electorate around Labour's position on Israel's war on Gaza, and Shocker Adam has been a fervent pro-Gaza voice. Now, according to a 2021 census, Leicester has around a 33% Muslim population. Ashworth had a number of unpleasant interactions with protesters, many caught on video, which can't have been good for his image in the electorate. Ashworth, I mean, he's a shadow cabinet minister. This is quite a high-profile Labour MP that appears to have lost his seat over Gaza. And again, just to return to something that you said, Zoe, there is a big driver in Carla Denyer winning that seat in Bristol from Thangam Debonair. Again, another member of the shadow cabinet, very high-profile Labour MP, because the anger around Gaza doesn't just confine itself to the Muslim community.
So let's talk about Jess Phillips, former guest on this show. She was another target of protest. She was booed during the announcement of her results. And here she is talking to Channel 4 after the fact.
Well, British politics has got caustic and nasty and dishonest, and we have to be really careful not to fall for it. And these people shouting and screaming, I didn't meet those people behind the doors. People were upset, people were kind, people were thoughtful. And yes, many of them were disappointed, and the Labour Party has got to win back their trust. But these people and what they did throughout the campaign, they do not represent any part of my constituency. That is not what I saw. I had lots of very heartfelt, deep, difficult conversations with people, and I get that, you know, there is a massive piece of work to do, and I will do it.
Is Jess Phillips a strange target for this amount of hostility, especially on the issue of Gaza, because she did resign her position in the shadow front bench in order to vote for the ceasefire amendment?
She actually did, quite strongly, compared to lots of people on the Labour front bench, come out in support of a ceasefire. I think for some voters, it doesn't matter.
Stories about tyres being slashed in people's cars, the kind of relentless sort of hostility that various people have described in that particular campaign in Birmingham and Yardley, that does not feel like the useful or productive way of channeling that frustration at all.
I don't think so. And, I think politicians try really hard to rise above that and keep the debate at a level. And obviously when it's an issue like this that really does upset people, it's hard to. And she clung onto that seat, and you can see she's getting emotional in that clip. I mean, it's just a really difficult thing.
Just to put into context how close that was, Phillips got 11,275 of the votes, while second place was the Workers' Party of Britain, that's George Galloway's party, on 10,582. Oof. That's tight. Yeah. It was an interesting seat as well. All the independents in the seat stood down to make way for the Galloway party. We've been talking about independents and their impact on the votership. But now that they're actually in, are we overstating the power of the independent MP?
I think as an independent MP, it's hard to be as effective as if you were an MP from a party. And that's because you don't have the party machinery behind you, right? So a lot of these candidates are elected not on a single issue, but a lot of them have an issue that they've been campaigning on. In many cases, that is Gaza. And, you can, as I said earlier in the podcast, you can be effective on that. You can raise it in parliamentary questions, you can statements, EDMs, all these things. But actually, it's very hard to be kind of effective on a policy basis. And you can still be a good constituency MP, but it is hard for independents to maintain that support. I think, people just pick up on the fact that there isn't this party machinery behind them, and the level of influence they might have as a result might not be so influential.
I mean, I know we're talking about the progressive side of things because obviously our interest, but also because that is the majority. But just to return to the Conservatives and Reform, are we also going to see on their side the opposite? Do you know what I mean? Like a moving further to the right. Which it's hard for me to imagine given we had Suella Braverman, but, this is real.
It's going to be a total battle for the soul of the Conservative Party now. It's going to be the Suella Bravermans, the Kemi Badenocks, the Nigel Farages versus the more moderates in the party who are going to say, we've lost seats to the Lib Dems and to Labour. We need to move back to the centre. And I don't know who's going to win. The other thing is donors. Who is donating to the Tory party anymore when a lot of those kind of big name businessy donors are now looking at Labour because they're in government? Who would donate to the Tory party and what do they want? Because there will be some sway over the Tory party's direction, depending on who is talking to them, offering them funding. And that's something that would, is worth a journalists with more energy than me looking into.
So,
Coco, ready to step into the energy breach?
Listen, my energy is back. I believe this is called a second win, so I'm ready. So over the campaign and last 4.5 years, we've heard so many incredible gaffes from the Conservatives. But to end the show, Wes Streeting is ready to take up the mantle in this clip from the BBC.
And yes, the implosion of the Conservatives and the SNP has put wind in Labour's sails. But the only reason we've got sails on the ship and the ship is shipshape is because Keir Starmer took the vessel from the shipwreck in 2019, rebuilt it and made it ship-shape and seaworthy again.
I relate to that so much right now. Do you know what I mean? Like he's gone in hard on the metaphor, but he's committed. And then there's a moment where he's like, "Oh no, I'm
panic
lost.
in his eyes.
I'm lost."
But that was early on in the coverage of the election.
Yeah.
Your body's trying to process Jägermeister.
But that's how I felt when I came on this show. When you opened up and said, "How are you?" I was like, "I've committed. I'm here now, but I am lost. There is panic in my eyes." For those of you who are not following us on YouTube, please do see the panic in my eyes.
That was painful. I mean, he does come up. Wes Streeting sometimes comes out with some good lines, but that was
ship shape.
He said ship shape maybe 5 times, which you don't need to say if you're doing a metaphor about ships.
He was just trying to show off that he hadn't had a drink. He's
Yeah.
like,
Well,
look at me, I can say
It didn't work.
No, it didn't read like that at all.
It sounded like he'd been on the Captain Morgan.
Very good. I see what you did there. We're keeping it nautical.
Well, I am a semi-professional. Zoe, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you can get some sleep soon.
Thank you.
Coco, you're my hero.
Yes.
I have never seen anyone power through with as much aplomb as you have done this morning.
All I'm saying is that in the break, you very kindly looked up if I could get a kebab before midday. So that's a good friend, Nish.
I'm an ally.
You are an ally.
I'm an ally. I'm a supporter of women. I think that when we discussed this idea that you were hosting this event and there might be booze involved, and I sort of had committed to being sober, I thought, that Coco Khan reflects the national mood. She's got caveats. She's got concerns. But mainly, she's sort of hungover and from toasting the demise of...
Yeah, you've got to take the wins where you can get them, Nish.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to take the wins when you can get them.
After 14 years, you've got to take the wins.
If none of us had been hungover, it wouldn't have been realistic.
No,
it would have been
no.
like a pathetic attempt at trying to speak to the nation.
That's
You need
exactly.
like one severely hungover person.
The people's princess, that's what they call me. No one calls me that. That's not. No.
They call her the Empress of Jägermeister.
Zoe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
and I
you
hope
for
you
having
get a nice nap.
Yes, me too. Me
You
too.
deserve it.
And that's it. Thanks for listening to Pod Save the UK. The Tories are toast and a new era is upon us. And we want to know what you want us to follow over the coming weeks. Thanks very much to everybody who joined me on the Discord yesterday. It was a much more pleasant election night for me this time around, as opposed to 2019, when I was on the television being asked by Boris Johnson's dad if I wanted Muslim women to be fighter pilots. That is genuinely true. This was in every sense, 100% improvement on my 2019 election experience. So yeah, I would love to hear from the people that I talked to on the Discord yesterday, or any of our listeners. Email us at psuk@reducedlistening.co.uk or drop us a voice note on WhatsApp. Our number is 07494 933 444. Internationally, that's +44 7494 933 444.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. Our handle is @PodSaveTheUK. You can find us on our new YouTube page, by the way. Catch full episodes and highlights there. It's in colour. You can see my pallid, hungover face in full Technicolor. Cola? Technicolor? This is what I
Technicolor. She's been on the whiskey and Technicolors, guys. Give Coco the campaign for. I don't even agree with the honour system, but the campaign to give Coco Khan a knighthood begins here.
For what?
For talking about the election whilst hungover.
Right.
Services to Jägermeister.
Lady Jägermeister.
Lady Jägermeister.
Oh my God.
Here she is, Baroness Jägermeister.
Oh my God. I really felt that in my chest.
Baroness Jägerbomb of East London.
I'm hungover enough that I will cry. I will cry. Anyway, please do drop us a review. That would be lovely. We would like that very, very much.
Thanks for joining us here on our new YouTube channel. If you've liked it, please subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new episodes drop. And why not let us know what you thought in the comments? And don't be afraid to drop a like too. It will help us out. We'll be back for another episode. Catch you then.